Hi all. So this video is to talk about the basics of loops. Especially we'll talk about for loops, and then we'll also see about how we do nesting of loops. So to begin with, let's start with a simple question. Say, if there is a user and we want to collect um, 10 numbers or let's say 5 numbers from the user. So uh, just a second. Yeah. So now the user will give 5 numbers. So now the way we generally write a C++ program is that, we'll declare 5 integers, int, input 1, input 2, input 3, input 4, and then input 5. And then we'll prompt the user telling that, enter 5 numbers. So this is the prompt, and followed by will accept input for all these numbers. Input 1, input 2, input 3, input 4, and last, input 5. So the key idea of loops is that if we see here, I'm kind of repeating certain pieces of code. The repeating parts are, here I'm declaring 5 integers. Here I'm accepting input for 5 times. So there is some logic, and this logic, instead of repeating, let's say for 5 times, since since this is for 5 times, whatever the code that I wrote, it worked. But now if I slightly change the question and say that now the user will give, let's say, 100 numbers. So in this scenario, if I'm going in the same approach as above, I have to declare 100 variables, input 1, input 2, and so on, input 100. So this is a tedious task, and this task is kind of error prone as well. That means there can be some errors in this code if I'm writing or declaring hundreds of variables. So to avoid these problems, like, writing huge amounts of code, huge number of lines of codes, or writing error prone codes, rather we prefer writing loops. So loops actually come to our rescue, and let's see how loops help us. So yeah. So the way loops help us is that, with a simple for loop, uh, uh, I can write a simple for loop in this manner. The objective of my for loop is to accept input for 100 times from the user. So if we all recollect, we have an initialization variable or initial variable. And this time I'm starting it at 0, the initialization variable. And my aim is that I have to accept input 100 times. Since I'm starting at 0, so if we see the I values are starting at 0, and then 1, and then 2, all the way till 99. This makes up 100 values. So we will be accepting the user input by controlling this variable I. And every time I get a user input, I will update y so that I value will increment. And then what I will do is I will simply write a cout statement telling that enter a number. And then I'd simply do cin, and let's say whatever the variable that I declared for storing the number, I'm calling it as int number. So in this way, if we see whatever the code that I had above, so that entire code, I was able to convert it into a for loop. And this time, if we see, I had like hundreds of variables or 100 variables. But here I just have a single variable called number. And with the help of these variables called I, and with a condition and with an update statement, I was able to convert a code which is actually tedious and error prone into somewhat simplistic logic. And with this simplistic logic, I can avoid error prone code and all the stuff. So this is the motivation for loops. And now the advantages of loops are, um, so let's say advantages of loops. So in general, uh, by writing loops, we can avoid, writing uh, repetitive code. So when I say repetitive code, let's see an example, like how loops help me in avoiding repetitive code. So the first thing is that um, we just have seen the repetition. The like the basic version of repetition we have seen. The basic version of repetition is that I didn't declare hundreds of variables, but rather I just went ahead and solved the entire question or the ask with a simple variable called number. So I use this number repeatedly, and with the help of this number, I was able to reduce, writing or initializing like more than one variable. So I avoided repeating variable initializations and stuff. So this is one advantage with loops, and I can say that this is the main advantage that we get with loops. Loops give us the power to reduce repeat code blocks that we generally repeat. So we get that advantage with loops. And also we'll see some more examples. Let's say uh, uh, we want to accept a number from the user, and print all the numbers between 0 and whatever the number that the user gave. So this is the ask. And if you see, this is a closed interval. So both 0 and 1, I think they both will be inclusive in this case. So for this, the way I have to write a loop is that, so I'm creating an integer variable to store a number, whatever the number that the user is going to give. I'll just read the number. And the ask is that I have to start at 0 and I have to end at the number. So this is my starting point, and this is my ending point. So this is the ask. So for this, the way I start is for, and I'm creating a variable. This variable starts at 0, and this variable needs to go all the way till number, because let's say if the number is 5, my code should print 0. Um, my code should print 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So if this is the input, my code output should be this. So for this purpose, I'm writing the for loop in this manner, I less than or equal to number, and then I plus plus. And now inside, all I'm doing is that I'm doing C out and I'm printing I. So if we observe here, I'm not doing endl nor slash n. So since I'm not doing neither of these, um, all my output will be printed into a single line. And in this manner, I can write a simple loop and then I can print all the numbers starting from 0 to n. And now, just to play around, if I change the question in a different manner, that accept a value for number, but print 0 to number minus 1. I can also portray this as closed interval of 0 and open interval of number. This is our math notation. So now let's say if number is 5, I have to print 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. I should print till number minus 1. So in this case, the way I write the loop is that I'll start at 0. So I'll start at 0, and either I can say that I is less than number and then I plus plus, and all I have to do is C out, and the output should not be in this manner, rather in this manner. C out and then simply say I and then get done with it. So I'm starting at 0 and I'm going all the way till number, but I is not equal to the number. So the difference is that here, since I'm printing the number as well, like 5 as well, I'm going all the way till number. But here I'm printing till only 4. So I'm going, less than number. Alternatively, I can also write something like this. For int I is 0, I less than or equal to, I'm using less than or equal to, and this time I'll say that whatever the number is there, go till number minus 1 and C out and simply print the value of I. So both these codes are equal. It's just that I'm using less than or equal to. So I'm just playing around with this, and this is how we can write basic for loops. And continuing in this manner, let's say that if I have a question that, accept a number n from the user, and print the following. So I'm slowly moving into nested loops. And in this case, in the previous case, I'm accepting number n and I was printing a single line. But now let's say that if my number n is 5, this time I want to print in this manner. I want to print 1, and then I want to print 1, 2 in the second line, and then I want to print 1, 2, 3. In the fourth line, I want to print till 4, and in the fifth line, I want to print till 5. So I want to do something like this. So again, the problem statement is that user will give an input n, and we have to print the output in this manner. If the value of n is 5, then I have to print for 5 lines. So the first thing, the way we start with this is that if we notice, when my n is 5, I have 5 lines of output. Let's say I'm calling this as line number 1. I'm calling this as line number 2. I'm calling this as line number 3, and this one is line number 4, and this one is line number 5. So I have 5 lines of output. And let's see another example output, just so that we are all on the same page. Let's say if my n is 3, the output should look something like this: 1, 1 and 2, 1, 2, and 3. So again, if I start counting the lines, if my n value is 3 means I'll have 3 lines of output. Line 1, line 2, line 3. So I have 3 lines of output. Now, so how can I write a for loop? So if we carefully observe, I can write, let's say, uh, I'm writing this logic. I'm writing this logic in this manner. Uh, for the first output that we have here, let's say I'll write a for loop. How do I write this for loop? I'll write it in this manner. For int I is 1, I'm starting at line number 1. Okay, I'm starting at line number 1. Or let's say, let me update this. So, or let's keep it this way. I'm starting at I is 1, and for the first line, the value that needs to be printed is 1. For the second line, we have to start from 1 and print 2 as well. And for the third line, we have to start at 1 and print all the way till 3. So the logic is like, if I have line number n, then I will be printing from 1, 2, 3, and so on, all the way till n numbers. So line n will have n numbers. So I'm starting, like I said, I'm starting with line 1. So let's say my for loop starts with int I is 1, I less than or equal to 1, because in line 1, uh, I just have to print one number for line 1. This is for line number 1. And I'm doing I plus plus. And all I will be doing is C out I. So the same logic as above in the above examples that we have seen. And now for the second line, I'll also write another for loop. I'm writing another for loop for the second line output. So for loop for line number 2, the output for in line number 2 was display 1 and 2. So for int I is 1, again I'm starting at 1, and this time I less than or equal to 2, I plus plus. And all I have to do is that just give I value as output. So if I build upon this logic, for the third line, this is for the third line. So for loop for line number 3, and the output that we are going to print is 1, 2, and 3. So again, my for loop, I'll start with I at 1, and my I value is less than or equal to 3 because I'm at third line, and then I plus plus. All I have to do is that C out I value. So like this, for line number n, so for my nth line, for loop for line number n, so for int I is 1, I less than or equal to n, I plus plus. I'll do something like this. C out of I, and so on. So if we see, for printing an output for n number of lines, I ended up writing n loops. This is for line number 1. This is for line number 2. And then I have another for loop for line number 3. Like that, I continued. Like that, I continued for all the lines. And for line number n, I had this loop. So if the user is expecting an output in this manner for n number of lines, I ended up writing n number of loops. So again, in a way, I'm creating a repetition. What am I doing? I'm writing same code, but the only thing that I'm changing is the loop condition. If we notice, all the for loops, they have the same code within them, but the only thing that changes is the loop condition. So now, if I can cleverly write a for loop to avoid these n repetitions, that's what we call nesting of for loops. So slowly we have code redundancy, and this code redundancy, we are avoiding using nesting of for loops. So now, if we carefully notice, if the n value is 5, my output should be of 5 lines: line 1, line 2, line 3, line 4, and line 5, line number 5. So depending upon n value, I'll print n number of lines. So let's say, let's not bother about this. Let's simply print line numbers for n number of, for n, whatever the n value is there. Let's print the line numbers. So let's say for int I is 1, I less than or equal to whatever the number that the user gave, and I plus plus. All I'm doing is C out line number 1, or whatever the line number, and then I. So if I'm doing this, the output of this code is going to be line number 1, line number 2. Let's say if my number is 3, this is my output is going to be line number 3. And this is what this code produces. But what is expected from me? The expectation from me is that I have to print So the expected output of my program should be, I have to print 1, 1 and 2, and 1, 2, and 3. So if we notice, for line number 1, oh, my bad. If we notice, for line number 1, we are printing up to 1. For line number 2, we are printing up to 2. For line number 3, we are printing up to 3. So now, the way I update my loop is that I'll copy the existing code as it is for int, start at 1, go all the way till the number, and increment the I value. Okay, but this time, instead of printing the line numbers, I'll start writing another loop. I'll say for int j is 1. Okay, I'm starting at 1. Why I'm starting at 1? No matter what the line number is, if it's line number 1, line number 2, or line number 3, in all the lines we are starting at 1. So I'll start at 1. Now, to what value should I go till? So in the line number 1, I'm starting at 1. In the line number 1, I'm starting at 1 and I'm ending at 2. In the line number 2, I'm starting at 1 sorry, this is at 1, 1, and I'm ending at 2. In the line number 3, I'm starting at 1 and I'm ending at 3. So this is how it starts. I start at 1, I go all the way till whatever the line number value is there. I go all the way till whatever the line number value is there. So in this manner, I'm going all the way till line number. And what is the variable that we are using to keep track of line number? I is the variable that we're using to keep track of line number. So I should go all the way till I. And I have to print 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. So I have to increment my j as well. So if I proceed in this manner, and simply say cout j, and then close it, and remember, after every line, I have to print the output in a new line. So to accommodate that, I'm using end L, and eventually I'll complete the part of the for loop in red in color. So this is the code, and just let me change the color of this. So cout end L. So this is how the entire loop looks like. So if we execute this loop, we are starting at, let's say number that the user gave is 3. So this is the I value of the variable. And so my personal suggestion is, whenever we are evaluating loops, always create variables in this manner, I, and this variable is for j. So this variable is for j. Now, at the beginning, when I'm running the loop, I'm starting at I is 1. And also, I'm starting j also as 1. And what are we doing? We are simply printing out the j value. This is for line number 1. So for line number 1, I value is 1. J value also starts at 1. And for line number 2, I value will be 2. So the line number and I value will always be in sync or synchronous. So whenever I is 1, we are in the line number 1. Whenever I is 2, we are writing in line number 2. Whenever I is 3, we are writing to line number 3. So I is a variable to keep track of our line number. And now again, we start at 1 for j. The reason why we start at 1 is that I have to print numbers starting at 1, and I have to go all the way till 2 or whatever the I value is there. So I'll print 1 and 2. How do I print 1 and 2? I'll print 1 and then increment j value. J value will be 2, and then I'll print j value. So if I write it in this manner, the initial j value will be 1, and then j value will be 2. And next, I'll move to line number 3. For line number 3 again, my I value is going to be 3. Again, these are in sync or synchronous. So my j values are going to be, I'll start at 1, I'll print the value, and then I'll increment j, I'll print the value, and then I'll come back, and then I'll increment j again, and I'll print it. The fourth time I increment j, the loop condition won't allow me to continue further. Loop condition won't allow me to continue further. Loop condition will not allow me further. So this is how both I and j work together, or both I and j work together and help us in printing a matrix like this. Now, the same thing, and your expectation from lab 5A is that you have to do the opposite of this using, or let me talk about another example and show the lab 5A part. So another example is that, accept a number n or accept a number from the user and uh, print in the following format. So let's say if the number that the user gave is 3, now my output should look like this. I have to print 3, 2, 1, or let's say even more simplified, I have to print 1, 2, 3. So the number is 3. I start with 3 numbers. So this is my line number 1. In the second line, I'll print only 1 and 2. So I'm reducing one number in the second line now. This is my line number 2. In the third line, I'm just printing 1. This is line number 3. So if we see, whatever the number is there, I have those many number of lines. Okay. So the same logic. So I need first loop. This loop will keep kind of track the number of lines. I'm starting at 1. And then and my I value, I have to print, if the number is 3, I have to print 3 lines of output. So I is less than or equal to number, and then a tracker to update Y. So this is my outside for loop. Now, coming for my inside for loop, because I have to print 1, 2, and 3 in line 1, I have to print 1 and 2 in line 2, and I have to print 1 in line 3. So the way I'll be starting is for int j is 1. Again here, j is 1 because I'm starting to print at 1. And then what I will do here is, in the last piece of code, if we observe, whatever my j value is, I'm printing those many numbers here. Whatever my j values are valid, I'm printing those numbers here. But this time, I kind of have to do the opposite. In the line 1, rather than printing till 1, I have to print till 3 or till the number. So the way I do this is that I'll write a condition in this manner. My j value, remember, number is 3 here. So I'll write a condition that whatever the j value is there, I'll say that my j value should be less than or equal to my number minus I. And see carefully here is that I'm starting at 1. So if I'm doing number minus 1, I'll end up getting only 2. So what I have to do is that I should remove the I value and add 1 to it. I should remove I and add 1 to it. And then I should do something like j++. And simply here, what I'm doing is C out. I'm printing the j value. I'm closing the loop. And as soon as we are done with the inside for loop, our code has to write whenever I value takes number 2 or a value of 2, I should move to the line number 2. So to accommodate that, I'm doing an end-L here, and then I'm closing the for loop. And the way we evaluate this output is that, so again, keep a tracker. This is my I value tracker. I'm starting at 1. And my j value is nothing but whatever the number that is there, minus I plus 1. So in the number that I gave is 3, and the I value at this point is minus 1 and plus 1 I have to do. So that means I will be trying 3 different j values. I'm starting at 1. I'll increment and I'll go all the way till 3. So in the output, if you notice, I'm simply printing the j values 1, 2, and 3. Up next, I will increment the value of I. And as soon as I value is incremented, the way we are playing with j is that j is number minus I plus 1. The value of number doesn't change, but the value of I changed. I is 2 now. So my j value maximum is going to be till 2. So j till 2 means 1 and 2. So I'll be outputting 1 and 2 in the second line. And in the third line, my I value becomes 3. And then the way I update my j is that j is number minus I plus 1. This is going to be 3 minus 3 plus 1. Overall, it will evaluate only once. So the values of j are going to be just 1, and I'll be printing 1 here. So this is how the output will look like. So just be careful on how we are going, and always try to relate these patterns in this manner. There will be an outer loop. We call this as outer loop. There will be an outer loop to keep track of line numbers in whatever line we are. This loop will keep track of the line number. And whatever the inner loop is there, this loop is to print the pattern. Whatever the pattern you want, this loop will achieve that pattern. Now, coming to your lab 5A, the task of lab 5A is that it tries to, we are trying to, get yourself familiarized with all the loops. So we have do while loop. The role of this do while loop is that you're supposed to, I think, enter a value between 1 and 20. If you're entering values like 25 or 30, this do while loop will prompt you to enter value between 1 and 20, but not greater than 20 or less than 1. That's the role of do while loop. And that is 5A part 1. And part 2 is that you have to use a for loop. And let's say the value entered here is 5. You have to use a for loop and print in this manner. Since the value 5 was given, you have to start with printing 5 stars and then go to the next line and then print 4 stars and then print 3 stars and then print 2 stars, and lastly, and my computer is giving up, and lastly print this one. So this particular piece of code is similar to the second nested for loop that we have seen. I have showed it with examples. You may have to replace the numbers or j values with star, and you may have your answer. And the third part is asking you to use a while loop, and you have to do something like this. The opposite, since the number entered was 5, so you have to do something like this. On line number 4, you have 4 stars. On line number 5, you have 5 stars. So this is how the output is expected. And if I can show a quick example of how I can write a while loop. Nested while loops. So whatever the for loop that we have written for printing, for int I is 1, I less than or equal to number I plus plus, and I wrote another for loop for j, for int j is 1, j less than or equal to I, and J++. So yeah, so here I was doing pretty much C out J value. I closed this and I did C out end L and I close this. So this entire for loop, the goal of this for loop was to print in this format. And the way, if I were supposed to write an while loop is that, get the input from the user, whatever the number that's there. And if you see, I have two variables to keep track of. I'm starting with int I being 1, and I have my condition. This while loop is the first for loop. So while I is less than or equal to number. And I'll also say that, so J is 1, and while I is less than or equal to number, and let's say I just declared J but never initialized it. So here I'm initializing my J value, and I'm writing another while loop, while J is less than or equal to I. So this one is for the first for loop, and this one is for the second for loop. And all I'll be doing is C out J. And the most important step is that do not forget to update the value of J. Do not forget to update its value. And then once J value is updated and it terminates, do not forget to update the value of I, and done. So this is how I can write a couple of while loops to achieve the same thing that the first for nested for loop that we have seen. So now your task is that you have to use this piece of code and achieve output in this format. So all these designs, if you guys recall, all the fancy prints that we see on any bill, whatever the bill, like Panda Express bill or any other restaurant bill, it starts with funny or nice patterns at the beginning. So observe those patterns, and next time whenever you observe a bill of Panda Express or in any other restaurant, just you can correlate that someone might have written a for loop to print nice stars pattern in this manner and all. So that's where we eventually use all these patterns. And yeah, that's pretty much for this video. Within this video I covered what is the basic idea of nesting and how we use nested for loops for printing the patterns. And always remember, the first outer loop, it is used to kind of keep track of the line numbers, and whatever the second loop is there, be it for loop or while loop, the second loop will be there to keep track of the pattern that we are printing. So one loop for line numbers and one loop for the pattern that we want to achieve. And that's all within this video. Thank you.